Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. Thanks for joining in here. My name is Brandon Kaysen. I am the past president of the Central Coast Green Building Council. We are a local nonprofit, a regional council of the U.S. Green Building Council. We represent San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties, and we're really focused on helping the Central Coast keep its natural beauty and its magical wonder. We're really focusing on the built environment and helping the Central Coast maintain a healthy economy, a healthy community, and a healthy natural landscape. At the beginning of the year, we were exploring different topics and things that we wanted to focus on, and electrification really came to the top for a multitude of different reasons. As we see more renewable energy coming onto the grid and an abundance of solar and wind energy and new technology coming into the space, we really wanted to build a conversation around electrification and what does it take to electrify our buildings? What are the potential benefits from it? And what are some of the myths that we can focus on demystifying around electrification? We primarily have a network of architects, builders, educators, but one of the areas that I think is really important that we continue to grow is the city or municipality perspective. So today we have Alelia and Chris from the city of Santa Barbara and city of San Luis Obispo, two individuals who have been really leading the march as far as municipal sustainability goes. They are fellow colleagues of mine, friends in this space, so I'm really grateful for both of their presence here today and the time that they're spending their lunch hour with us to share some of their experiences around building electrification. Both the city of Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo have electrification reach codes and have really taken the first step to show the rest of California, the rest of the United States, and really the rest of the world that electrification can happen. It can provide significant benefits to our communities. And today they're here to share a little bit of their experience. So before we get into the actual panel, I just want to share a couple things that I'm really proud about that the Central Coast Green Building Council is doing. On the left here, you'll see that we have a whole series of events. We've done some hard hat tours, some building tours. We were present at Earth Day. Today, we're doing our electrification panel, and we have a couple other events on our schedule for electrification. We have a code breaker discussion by Southern California Edison that we've partnered up with to offer, as well as a conversation specifically for contractors on May 13th with Lucas Johnson. We're going to continue to do these educational series offerings throughout the year. Next, we have fire and water smart design. So we'll have a similar series with a different theme. And then after that, we're going to be talking about decarbonizing the built environment. So jump on board, stay tuned for the rest of what the CCGBC is going to offer. And if you might want to be a mentor, we have a very successful mentorship initiative that really focuses on pairing the next generation, or what we call emerging professionals, with seasoned professionals in the building ecosphere, really to support them in answering those tough questions, preparing for interviews, or getting an idea of what it's like a day in the life of a professional in the field of their interest. It could be solar design or landscape design. It could be municipal management, or really any topic. So if you think, you know what, I might want to offer a little bit of my time to support an emerging professional in the sustainability world, then this program is definitely for you. You can reach out to us at any time if you have interest or just want to have some questions answered about the program. We would love your support. And of course, we couldn't do this or really any of our other offerings without our dear members. So if you are interested or want to join the CCGBC family, here's a QR code to go navigate to our member page. We would love to have your support. And with that, that's enough about me and enough about the CCGBC. Let's jump into our panelists today. So first we have Alelia from the city of Santa Barbara. Alelia, will you take the mic?
So much, Brandon. Really excited to be here, guys. And I really only have 4 slides because I'm really excited to get into the conversation piece of this presentation. But I wanted to give you a little bit of context of who I am, what we do at the city, and our experience with electrification so far. And the who I am part's really important because it's like the evolution of the sustainability department. I started at the city in 2005, riding on the back of trash trucks, doing a trash audit as an intern. And then quite a few years later, I am now a department head overseeing 20 people. So it's really an exciting transition and to show how the program has grown over the years. We only created the sustainability department in 2020. Before that, it was sort of deployed throughout the city organization. But that was a really exciting formalization of our work when we created that. Next slide, please. So what we do in the sustainability department, we have 3 divisions. We have our environmental services division that does all of the trash, recycling, compost, circular economy, and we actually manage the homeless encampment cleanup response. We have our energy and climate division, which does climate action and adaptation, energy efficiency, renewable projects, things like that. And then we have Santa Barbara Clean Energy, which you'll hear about today. This is our city-only community choice energy entity, which provides 100% carbon-free for the entire city of Santa Barbara. Next slide. So the real reason we're here today is our key city goals. We are fortunate to have a city council that's been very proactive in climate action. They set a 100% renewable electricity goal by 2030 back in 2017, and then followed it up pretty much because San Luis Obispo did it with a carbon neutrality goal by 2035. So thanks, Chris, for that. What the heck does carbon neutrality mean? It basically means we want to remove as many emissions as we produce. So there's sort of a bifurcated approach to that. You reduce how many you produce in the first place, and then you have to deal with the removal of the rest. So this chart on the right here shows where our emissions in the city of Santa Barbara come from until recently. Most of it is transportation, about 60%. That's pretty standard across the state and even across the nation. And then about 4% is waste to landfills. That's pretty much been eliminated with the resource center launching up at Tahigas landfill. And then the remaining 40% is split evenly between electricity and natural gas. And really that's related to building energy use. So when we launched Community Choice Energy here in October, we essentially eliminated that yellow piece of the pie, which is really exciting. By far the most substantial thing the city has ever done to fight climate change. And that's really cool. What was really exciting about it though, is that it actually gave us a pathway to that carbon neutrality goal by giving us an avenue to decarbonize that gas piece through building electrification and decarbonize the transportation piece through vehicle electrification. So really the strategy moving forward with our climate action plan update that we're doing now is electrify everything. Next slide, please. So we've had a few reach codes over the years. We've done them. They've been energy efficiency based reach codes. And what that means is that when someone comes for a building permit, they have to beat Title 24 standards by a certain percentage. We've had these in 2010 and then in 2015. And they were relatively successful, but at this point, Title 24 really has energy efficiency pretty well handled. And so we wanted to be more aggressive on the natural gas side. We started looking at what other cities were doing in terms of electrification ordinances. I talked a lot with Chris because he had just been through it in San Luis Obispo. I talked with some other cities about what approach they had taken. And ultimately, we chose not to go the reach code route. If you're not familiar with the REACH code, it's basically the city's purview to enhance a building and safety code, make it more rigorous. It has to be approved by the California Energy Commission in this case for the energy code, and then it has to be reapproved every 3 years. So it can be pretty onerous of a process. So we chose to use the city's policing powers and do a health and safety ordinance. We had to find that it was in the city's it was against the city's best interest to continue to allow new natural gas infrastructure connections. And then we amended our municipal code with an ordinance that prohibits natural gas in new construction. The beauty of this is it does not ever sunset until we repeal it. And so we don't have to go through the every 2 years process of community engagement and revisiting or reinventing the wheel. So that's a huge burden lifted off of the staff. Because of the timing at the end of COVID and because of the feedback we got from the community, and this was sort of a big permanent change, we did create some exemptions in our code. A lot of restaurants were left reeling after COVID, and this almost just felt like too much for them to deal with. Even though it only applies to new construction restaurants, our council just wasn't ready to make sure that they were all electric. So we do allow an exemption for restaurants. We do imagine that will probably go away in future updates. We also allow labs and clean rooms to be exempt because there's no great alternative for both of those configurations, and we want to encourage that type of industry to come to Santa Barbara, and so they're exempt. We also have an infeasibility exception, so not exemption, but if you can prove that it is infeasible to be all electric and serve your business purpose, you can apply to the city building official for an exception. Even if you are granted one of these exemptions or an exception, you still have to install the conduit and the panel size for future electrification. And so there's not a tremendous amount of cost savings, if you manage to get the exemption. So really a lot of people asked us, what's the purpose of this ordinance? Santa Barbara is built out. We're not building a whole lot of new infrastructure. And it was really, if we have this carbon neutrality goal, we got to stop, we got to put the goalpost somewhere and not keep adding to it in the future with any new construction we do build. But not only that, the thing that I think is really important about all of these cities and counties throughout California taking some sort of action like this is that it sends a market signal to the manufacturers that we're serious, this is the direction we want to go. So start bringing the technology along, because that's one of the big pieces of feedback we get is that people aren't comfortable yet with a lot of the electrification technologies. So I think that is really the key component, is that we want to send that market signal. Next slide, please. So we learned quite a few lessons. Some of you may have seen, maybe you got an email from Californians for Balanced Energy Solutions, or some text messages. We got a lot of attacks from some community-based organizations that were really anti-natural gas. Also, people really love their gas stoves. They really were worried that we were going to come into their homes and take them out. So really educating on new construction versus existing was a lot of the work we had to do. People don't know what the technology is, right? And so that's a lot of the work we still see before us is, what is a heat pump? What are heat pump water heaters? And what are induction stoves? And so that there's a lot of education that needs to happen, not only on the homeowner, but on the contractor, right? Because the contractor is the one that's coming in and recommending a course of action. And so making sure that they're advocating for these electrification measures. And I cannot tell you how often I heard about the gold medallion homes and how much of a disaster they were. These were homes in the 60s and 70s that were supposed to be state-of-the-art future homes, and a lot of them were all electric. And they just really left a bad impression in people's mouths. And this was in the time of resistance heating and things like that. So it was really expensive and energy intensive. But we're competing with the people who had one of those homes. We definitely need to work closely with building and safety and our community development folks to make sure that they are A, aware of the ordinance. That was sort of a big deal. B, are able to enforce it and intelligently respond to questions, and that they feel empowered to help give recommendations to projects. And then I can't iterate this fifth bullet enough. Just education, education, education on the consumer side, on the installer side, and certainly on the designer side as well. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm excited for the questions. We'll let Chris pick up here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So next we'll move over to Chris from the city of San Luis Obispo.
Well, thanks, Brandon, and great job, Alelia. It's always tough to follow you in these presentations. So my name is Chris Reed. I'm the Sustainability Manager at the City of San Luis Obispo, and I have been managing our all-electric new buildings work for 3 or 4 years now, and have been working on our existing building retrofit program for a couple of years. Wanted to start with this picture here on the cover slide because it marks the culmination, or maybe an important mile marker on this long decarbonization journey. So what you're looking at here is actually a inside of a ADU that is built into a new single family home out at San Luis Ranch, one of our final subdivisions that our general plan contemplates. There's a couple of beautiful things about this picture. One, in the upper right, you see the heat pump cassette there. And then right sort of center lower, you see an electric stove. What you also see is a really beautiful new dwelling unit that's helping us achieve our housing goals, achieve some of our mobility and infill goals with the location of the project. And so this just shows you that new electric buildings really are the future, and they look great while doing it. So if you go next slide, please. I want to leave this up while I talk a little bit about who we are as a department and what we're up to. Or rather as an office. So I represent the Office of Sustainability. We've been in existence for about 4 years now, and really in I guess that must have been 16, there was a recognition by heading into 2018, there's a recognition by our council that in our community that climate change is real, it's serious, and it is the responsibility of local governments to both address the causes of climate change and prepare for the impacts. This sort of understanding that due to past inaction, we are now faced with the decision of either engaging in really ambitious action that is aligned with our vision and values and oriented towards achieving the outcomes our community wants, or allowing disruption to happen to us in really chaotic and erratic ways. And we've chosen the former. And so our office focuses on all kinds of things. We have a really holistic view on what sustainability means to us. So yes, it means EV chargers. Yes, it means all electric new buildings, but it also means housing policy. It also means fuel management. It means getting goats out on our open spaces to chew up the possible fire fuel. It means conserving our open space and making sure that our urban growth boundaries are maintained, all kinds of things. But I bring this slide up too, because I think it's really important as we have the conversation that I imagine we're going to have about all electric buildings later in this webinar, just to remember what the baseline is, right? We are in extremely, extremely troubling waters. And the idea that we can wait on substantial action is the reason that we're here. And so in many spaces and many of the policy discussions that are happening internationally, federally, at the state level, in our local communities, facing with these really, really hard challenges of how do we manage disruptive or really ambitious action in a way that aligns with our goals and policies, because there is no really other option at this point. We are going to either we're going to deal with climate change, whether we actively deal with it or not. It's here, and it is transformational for our times. The reason I bring that up, one, it's important to remember this. I hate to be rude during lunch and bring up bad news, but there is a reason we're having these conversations, right? And across all the areas of possible solutions, there are some real trade-offs we have to consider. Some of them are going to be very hard. The good news with all electric new buildings is actually the trade-offs are pretty manageable. And in fact, as we head into the next decade and the rest of this century, based on our findings so far of how they perform in our built environment and all of the research that we've seen, they're not just manageable trade-offs, but they're actually the superior form of building from a cost and occupancy, comfort level, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Can you go to the next slide, please? Like Alelia and like all local governments that are focused on this, we're not just thinking about buildings in isolation. implementation. This isn't just a random policy focus, but really part of a comprehensive objective to, a comprehensive view on how our greenhouse gas emissions occur in our community and how we reduce emissions along the way. So we're also engaged in cleaning up our grid through a community choice aggregator called Central Coast Community Energy, a different one than Santa Barbara, but equally impactful. We're focused on issues related to solid waste, natural solutions, mobility, et cetera, and green buildings is a major focus of ours. So we have two adopted goals right now. One is to eliminate on-site operational emissions of greenhouse gas emissions immediately. We do that through all electric new buildings. And the second is to reduce existing building emissions by half by the end of this decade. So that's essentially cutting the emissions from existing buildings in half over the next 8 years. Next slide, please. What that looks like in practice, I thought instead of organizing into new buildings and existing buildings, I'd try it out chronologically. This is my test version of that, so we'll see how that goes. This conversation's been happening in our community for a while as we had new subdivisions coming up and negotiating development agreements 2015, 16, 17. The idea that we wanted net carbon neutral new developments or net zero energy, et cetera, was really bubbling to the surface. We were able to negotiate some code provisions that actually, development agreement provisions that actually allowed us to, under certain circumstances, require that buildings eventually be all electric. So we knew even back then that this was going to be the future of building, but weren't quite ready to have that conversation so directly. And so that really morphed in 2019 as we, along with many others in the state, started to develop a comprehensive approach. So not just on a development by development agreement, but across our city, a new buildings electrification policy. And in fact, we were the second or maybe third city in California to adopt a REACH code. So whereas Alelia talked about using their public health and safety police powers, we amended our building code to provide essentially a more direct path for all electric new buildings. And the first time in our city's history, and again, only the second or third time in the state, had a pathway for really streamlined all electric new building permitting. There are a couple bumps in the road along the way, but then we were able to fully implement that policy starting in 2020. And so we've been actively implementing that for about 1.5 years now. 2021, we started our retrofit program kickoff. This could be a whole other topic of conversation I won't dive into here as much unless there's questions, but obviously existing buildings are really challenging. And so we've spent the last 1.5 years or so taking early no regrets actions around understanding our building stock and working with a couple of affordable housing developers to do some pilot retrofit projects to really understand how electrification works in our buildings in the city. We just this February presented to our council how our new buildings program performance is going, and this REACH code work where we're preferring all electric new buildings has been pretty impactful. We're building lots of electric buildings, but we're also seeing a lot of natural gas buildings get constructed. And so we have strategic directions we head into 2022 to, being deeply inspired by Alelia and her team's work and our colleagues at Santa Cruz to actually move from the building code electric preferred approach to a full public health and safety approach where we require all electric new buildings with, of course, some exceptions and other things built in. All of that at the same time, we're working really proactively on learning from our pilot retrofit program, and this year hope to really accelerate that and get some more heat pumps in existing buildings. Next slide, please. I had the benefit of seeing Alelia's slides before I wrote my deck, and so most of my key learnings are Alelia's key learnings. I guess the other two things I would say, one is just that new buildings are actually they're really straightforward. There will be some use cases where there's not an electric alternative for some process or machine, and we'll just have to figure that out on a case-by-case basis and be reasonable. But the vast majority of new buildings, all electric buildings, are just cheaper to build, healthier, safer to operate, and really aligned with the future. So The other, and we'll talk about this in some of the questions later, is just that when people say, is this more expensive? Do people save money? The other key learning is that that's actually a really complicated question that you need to break apart a little bit to answer. But I know that we'll talk about that in a little bit, so I'll be happy to break it apart then. So I'll stop with my presentation here and be happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you both. That was a wonderful overview of both of your programs. I really appreciate all the hard work that you're putting into this effort. And what I would like to do now is just jump into some questions. So for those of you in the audience, we did get some questions fielded from our newsletter participants and the recipients of the newsletter, as well as some of our social media friends. So we've compiled a list from the public, as well as some of our own kind of personal questions that we wanted to cover. But if you have a question related to electrification or the municipal approach to sustainability, please feel free to throw that in the chat box. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end to field some of your questions. So without further ado, I want to jump right in here. This first question is for both Chris and Alelia. Can you share a quick summary of your existing REACH codes or ordinances rather, and how they fit into your overall sustainability and resilience goals? I know that you both talked about that quite a bit. I would like to hear some of the pros and cons versus a REACH code as compared to a health and safety ordinance. I think that's really fascinating. So maybe if you could take a moment and share a little bit about that.
Go first, Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just because we took the sort of the first approach that kind of emerged in the state, and you guys built on that, so maybe it makes sense for us to talk first. So every 3 years, the state of California releases a triennial update to the California Building Code, and in that building code is the California Energy Code, which lays out the provisions and requirements for energy efficiency for new development. And in 2019, for the first time, based on how compliance modeling software was drafted and based on how the language is drafted, all electric buildings could conceivably be built sort of on equal footing with natural gas buildings. And there's a long history as to why that is I won't go into here. Sort of concurrent with that was the emerging awareness of the composition of natural gas as being mostly methane and how that was being disruptive for our climate. And so one of the things that you can do is local governments can amend the statewide California Energy Code. So typically we just adopt the code wholesale, and then when someone comes to the counter for a building permit, we say, do you comply with the state code? But we have legal purview to make local amendments to that. So what we did is we said, hey, look, if you build a building with just all electric new building, then you just comply with the minimum standards of the California Energy Code and we'll get you your building permit. If you include natural gas, we're going to require that your building be higher performing for residential buildings and have a higher efficiency compliance margin if you're a non-residential building. We also threw on requirements for solar and then also sort of pre-wiring for future electric appliances. That's really the amendment we made under the California Energy Code under state law. We can make that amendment as long as we make findings that that those amendments are cost effective and that we're not requiring buildings to use more energy than they would otherwise under the code. So we made those findings, and then California Energy Commission actually hears that during a business meeting and sort of approves it. So we went through that whole process and have been implementing it through our energy code for, again, 18 months. As Alelia alluded to, though, those amendments only live with the current draft version of the energy code. So as the 2019 code expires in December of this year, we'll have to update our approach no matter what.
And I would just build on and say we really benefited from folks like Chris going first and spent a lot of time speaking to Chris and others about the benefits and pitfalls of each of the approaches, and just ultimately knew that this was something we wanted to have stick around for a while. And so the health and safety approach just made more sense for this. I think the reach code is a really powerful tool for things like existing buildings, which are going to be more sensitive and harder to tackle, because it really allows you to provide, similar to what Chris just described, like a menu approach to how you might comply. And I think that's going to be more palatable for existing buildings than just saying, take out you have 5 years to take out your natural gas, right? That's not going to fly. So that's where I see the benefit difference.
Awesome. Alelia, I'm wondering what did you see being one of the more impactful things that a community member could do within their local government to help facilitate this conversation? You know, was there anything that occurred in the process in Santa Barbara that really stood out as something that was impactful?
I mean, I have the same answer to that question, regardless of whether it's reach codes or any interaction with your local government, and it's talking to your elected officials. I mean, 100% you should have the conversation with them and ask them questions, because then that prompts them to ask us questions, which is really great. I think the community, despite the attacks from the other groups that were, anti the ordinance, the community really showed up. Especially the architecture and builder community really showed up to the council meeting. We had 4 hours of public comment on this item when it first had its first hearing. I think that's really powerful. I mean, that's ultimately who we work for, is you. So we want to hear from you on these things.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Chris, going back to you, I know you had talked about the challenges when you talking about price. Speaking of new construction, what have you seen in terms of how price compares from a more traditional build with natural gas versus an all-electric building?
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. Well, this is actually one of the easier. So anytime you talk about price and savings, it's a highly dynamic conversation. It depends on where someone's buying something, when they're buying something, et cetera, et cetera. But for new buildings, the cost to construct is actually a pretty straightforward question. We sort of see across from like project sort of concept through design, through earthwork, through vertical construction, to like permanent occupancy. We just, every single step of the way, when you design for a single fuel system, you realize savings. So it is savings in terms of time. You only need to coordinate with one utility. You only need to design, if you're doing a larger project and you need sort of master utilities design, you only need to design that one thing. You only need that one permit from the city, or that set of permits from the city. There's all the things, I assume that folks are here, they're generally familiar, but just as a recap, there's all sorts of site savings that occur. You don't need to attach, you don't need to pay for hookups for natural gas. You don't need to run the lines throughout your home. You have savings achieved from small things like no carbon monoxide sensors, but also you have a real increase in value of having the ability to have air conditioning provided to your eventual tenants, and the ability to provide, receive value for that at no extra cost through HVAC heat pump systems. But we also see just savings in terms of unexpected things. Those are all those things I just talked about in the cost effectiveness studies, but we have a large subdivision that's had a tremendous amount of earthwork required. Just the money that they've saved from not having to trench and then store that earth somewhere and then move it somewhere else has been substantial. So really across from soup to nuts, all electric new buildings are in most cases just the cheaper way to build a building.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Alelia, something that I hear come up a lot is, the concerns about fixed and low income residents. It's something that I'm sure is top of mind as we talk about resiliency and equity within our cities. And just wondering if, from an equity standpoint, is living in an all electric building more expensive? How do we tackle the income inequality issues as we move into an all-electric landscape?
Yeah, and that's really top of mind for all of us right now as we do all of our adaptation and mitigation work. But the beauty of an all-electric building really on its surface is that it allows for ultimate control of how and when you use the source, right? So the new trend in building developments is smart buildings. And all of these appliances, especially the electric appliances, are able to be storage sinks, right? You can actually store power in them and deploy it in a way that actually helps you mitigate electrical costs based on time of use sources. Additionally, the building code requires new construction to have solar installed. And so for the first time, you can actually generate the source on site, which is a huge benefit when you're mitigating costs. Because remember, we're only talking about new construction. And so it's only for the tenants moving into that. Mm-hmm. I think on top of that, when you're talking about the true cost, sort of to Chris's point he was just making, so there's unseen costs, right? Like there's 42% increase in childhood asthma in homes with natural gas usage. That's a cost. That's a societal cost, and it's a healthcare cost. You know, there's also ventilation issues. There's all sorts of unseen costs that those lower income community members are most often bearing the burden of. And so it's really, in a sense, trying to take care of those health issues related to natural gas use in a building. But the other, we're trying to develop behavioral mechanisms as well as payment and incentive mechanisms to make it even more cost effective. The electrical utilities offer the CARE program, which is an income qualified program that provides subsidized electrical service. And so already there's things in place to try and mitigate those cost increases. And really, we're not currently paying the true cost of serving these utilities to buildings. And so it's really truing up that cost. I think it's important.
Absolutely. Chris, I'm wondering if you want to expand on this a little bit more and maybe share some things that you've seen from existing buildings. The next question was really focusing on opportunities to save money moving to an all-electric home, and if there's health benefits included, but maybe you could take a moment and share some of your insight from existing buildings and electrification.
Sure, yeah. I think that, again, it's really say, is it cheaper or more expensive, or is this going to impact our low and moderate income households? And let's maybe focus on new buildings to start with. It's important to not just imagine a worst case scenario, but actually look at what the cost effectiveness studies based on best available research and what our findings in the field actually suggest. And so, yeah, if you're building a 4,000 or 5,000 square foot house and you have all kinds of fun plug load, and you also are building to the minimum amount of solar required by the code, like you're going to have some utility cost increases if you're an all electric building. If you are designing an affordable deed restricted multifamily project, well, in fact, let's look at what the local developers are building. Their internal specs are for all electric buildings for a variety of reasons. And so the folks that are actually tasked with providing affordable housing are already choosing this sort of absent policy approaches. Then you're sort of looking at, okay, what about that middle band, the sort of either single family homes or multifamily units that might be for sale or for rent that aren't deed restricted affordable, but maybe are a little bit sort of, more accessible for low and moderate income households. And even in those cases, when you look at the cost effectiveness studies for our climate zone and our utilities in San Luis Obispo, you see really cost parity, maybe a modest increase if solar is built to the very bare minimum, but even just 1 or 2 panels can get folks back to cost parity. But I also think oftentimes the question puts us as passive receivers when we're actually active participants in this ecosystem of cost and value. If we think about the value that a household has for air conditioner, now that will come in a new building in a highly efficient way as the planet is warming around us, that's a new variable to think about that provides value in this construction. We also think about our agency as the advocates for all electric rates or for the kinds of time of use systems that pay people to reduce energy when it needs to be reduced on the grid so they can receive value from that. Like we can advocate to that at our CCAs. We can become, as cities, part of proceedings at the CPUC to make that happen. In our day-to-day lives, we can also be educators in how our own behavior can shape how electricity costs are borne. So both, in the current environment, based on the best studies, like this is an opportunity to cost parity or savings. And we have a wide range of opportunities to continue to create ecosystems that make all electric buildings even more valuable to our communities. So that's the easy answer for new buildings. For existing buildings, it's just incredibly complicated. There will be times when there's a slam dunk opportunity for savings. There'll be many times when we're not there yet. We've been working with a group where we've actually been able to model all of our buildings in our city and then run some regression analysis to see how many buildings essentially would have cost savings, positive return on investment, positive net present value, et cetera. And we're seeing that some combinations of retrofits, typically solar plus heat pump hot water heating, in most of our buildings have a return on, a net present value and can pay themselves off in 7 to 10 years. The question then is like, how do we provide financing, funding, et cetera, to allow people to unlock that? But that's a whole different discussion. But there are opportunities, but it's complicated.
Yeah. And Alelia, do you want to comment or expand on that? One of the questions we had from the community was, does it even make sense for me to go all electric if I don't have solar or storage on my house?
It depends what your motivation is. I think the answer to that question, to Chris's point, the context will be different based on how you use electricity and when you use it, but also where are you trying to get to? I think if you're just looking at cost, I think it'll be challenging to, even break even without the solar. I don't know that you need the storage, but you might want the storage for resiliency and certainly for arbitrage or peak shifting. I think that there are going to be many things that are coming down the pike that will make it more beneficial to you. There is currently a clean energy financing proceeding happening at the California Public Utilities Commission. I saw Chris is on here if he wants to weigh in on that, or Chris Moore. But we, for example, the city through Santa Barbara Clean Energy submitted a proposal through that to develop a decarbonization incentive rate, which would say, all right, if you add an electric heat pump or a heat pump water heater that has an estimated added electrical load, our fixed costs as an electrical utility are already met by your baseline load. So that added load should come to you at a cheaper price. So we're trying to develop mechanisms to create more cost effectiveness as we transition away from a dual fuel house. That's just one example. There are many, many examples, including tariff on bill financing, where you can purchase these systems through your electric utility bill and then pay it off over time through some sort of savings mechanism. So I mean, if you don't have solar, I would almost hold off a little bit, but I think it's going to transition substantially in the next couple of years.
That's great. Thank you. Chris, so widening the context a little bit, do you think that we as a community need to rely on natural gas until electricity infrastructure allows us to safely or securely convert to all electric buildings? Or how do you see this transition occurring? And what potentially do you think is a timeline that's appropriate?
Well, first, they say when you're a ditch, the first step to getting out is to stop digging. So the first step is not building new infrastructure that we then have to consider how to address over time, right? And so the new buildings piece, again, is pretty straightforward. On the existing buildings piece, I mean, it sort of builds off the answer that Alelia gave, is that much of this will depend on who, what, where, when, and why. So folks who are highly compelled from a climate perspective may be able to take on projects that don't have a net return. Like I bought a dishwasher after 10 years of no dishwasher. That's not like an economic, I have no payback on that, but I chose to install that appliance. And some people just choose to install these appliances, right? And then there will be policy that helps supplement the costs, and we'll have some transitions. I think so of course, like we're going to be with a natural gas system for the foreseeable future, and frankly, really rely on our partners at our natural gas utilities, who we have great relationships with, to use their, help their infrastructure be safe, help it provide the energy that it currently provides. And also, by the way, they have a huge role to play in decarbonizing other sectors of the economy. And so there's a really, I think, fertile place for relationship there moving forward. And so, yeah, we will have to rely on natural gas in some way for the foreseeable future. I think the more interesting question is, as retrofits move past pilot phase and start to happen with greater speed and scale, and this is assuming that the state and feds and others come in and provide resources to help this happen, and that our utilities are working in harmony to make this happen, is what that looks like. And that's a much bigger question for, I think, another time.
Mm-hmm. All right. Alelia, we live in, some would say, a year-long fire season, with the concerns of the electrical grid going down or being de-energized during high heat or high winds. There's some concern about all electric homes going completely offline. Can electrification fit into the resiliency and fire preparedness landscape? And do you have any other comments about PSPS events and electrification?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, an important one to consider as we navigate this transition. I mean, the bottom line is, even when the electricity is off, you should not be using natural gas. There's a slew of problems with that in terms of ventilation and ignition and all sorts of things. That being said, you can still use your stove. And so, of course, there's a sort of a default assumption that that's the better resilience option. I think that that's a lot of the work that we're doing towards storage implementation with batteries, getting to a place where we can fortify certainly our critical facilities, but ideally even allow people to get their homes off grid during an outage. And it has this tangential benefit of really benefiting the grid in terms of power flow in a non-emergent setting. And so this is really a great pathway forward. So I think that's one thing that we'll focus on. I think the utilities are, as you know, doing a tremendous amount to harden their infrastructure, and to really, they're even trying to localize their infrastructure by adding more circuitware and shortening their circuits so that they can really clamp down where they need to and not turn off an entire city, for example, but turn off really hot spots. So it doesn't really help those hot spots, but it helps the whole city, navigate a PSPS. We are working very closely with Southern California Edison here, and I'm sure SLO is in PG&E territory, to ensure that those PS events are not just like because we can, but really thoughtfully implemented and integrated, and do they need to happen? But ultimately, I think the whole electricity sector is getting really smart, and you have the ability to kind of switch off of the grid as you need to, or at least that's where we need to go. Lastly, there's also benefits to heat pump water heater, for example. Again, it can be an energy storage mechanism where it can store water for a long period of time and deploy it later. So really the stove is kind of the linchpin issue, but most of us have an alternative like a barbecue that we can.
Yeah, that's often what I say too. A lot of the modern appliances that use natural gas have an electronic component to them, whether it's a fan or an igniter. So it's interesting, a lot of our buildings are already all electric in a sense, with gas in addition to it. And who doesn't love using their barbecue, right? So, I mean, if you love cooking over fire, what's better than a barbecue? Chris, wondering if you want to expand on that at all, and what you would say to a client that has concerns about having an all-electric home.
Yeah, I think, one of the important things, again, like you can think about it in the abstract and feel really frightened by the unknown, or you can really think about like, what is this, what are we really asking about here? What is the use case? So you imagine the power goes down for 2 days. What are the end uses that like you really critically would depend on that would justify changing a system or using 99.999999% of the time and the rest of the year and the rest of the decade? And I think that's really helpful to think through in specifics. And that's going to be site specific and client specific, right? But certainly, like, we have go bags for emergencies, like we have flashlights loaded up because we don't have gas lamps inside, right? We have electric lamps. And so we have flashlights and we have our portable camping stove, and that's sufficient for today, that we can get through a day or two in that way, right? But the future is not so far away. I mean, we are in a space of rapid advancement on energy storage and energy systems. From a system perspective, the 2022 Energy Code already has location requirements for single family home. You basically have to be storage ready, and most other building types actually have storage requirements built in. So into our buildings that we are building, we will have energy resiliency. And then you just look at some of the emerging technologies around energy storage and energy transfer for new electric vehicles. And as those become commonplace, and if we come anywhere close to hitting our state's goals on electric vehicle adoption, we're all going to be driving around massive batteries. And while you can't plug your internal combustion engine vehicle into your house and pump gasoline in for combustion, you certainly will be able to plug in your new truck or car and operate your appliances that way for health and safety. Add to that the fact that, you know, innovative folks like Central Coast Community Energy are looking at front of meter battery storage for distribution circuit resilience, that there's all kind of, you know, there's a PG&E tariff to allow for community scale microgrids to occur. And we're seeing a space where this bigger question around grid resilience really has a lot of answers that are quite compelling.
Awesome, thank you. And Alelia, you talked about the nostalgia of cooking over fire and people being really attached to their natural gas stoves. What have you seen through your experiences talking to people that have used induction? What could you do, and what can you say to ease the minds of those that are maybe still a little bit attached to that way of cooking?
Yeah, I mean, I think unless you're a chef that is like using your gas stove to flambe on a daily basis, I think that, you know, there's no loss. And if anything, there's a gain. There's, you know, high controllability of heat on an induction cooktop. Ease of cleaning is incredible, right? It's just a glass surface, so it's really easy. It doesn't get hot, and so you're not worried about getting burnt. So I think more and more the people who are actually taking the plunge, they're reporting back that they love it. They absolutely love it. The city, in order to sort of encourage the adoption of induction cooktops, actually has single burner induction cooktops available for checkout at its Library of Things at the Central Library through Santa Barbara Clean Energy. So I invite you, if you're in Santa Barbara, to go ahead and check that out, and you can test it out. It comes with a set of pans and a magnet, so you can test if your pans are ferrous. But ultimately, you know, it's not any different, or if anything better, than cooking on gas. I think it is a little bit more challenging in restaurants because of the high impact on the cooktops. Again, they are glass. And so if you're in a high traffic environment and banging pots around, maybe there's some concerns there. But I think that is coming through. More and more chefs are actually sort of singing the praises of induction, which is great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have a friend that jokingly says, you know, people that are still like attached to their gas powered stoves just love the taste of methane infused into their cooking. And it's sarcastic at the best, but I think that was pretty funny. All right, Chris, any other technologies that you're really excited about in the space, or innovations other than what you shared?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a really exciting innovation around sort of the ability to create virtual grids with all of our, you know, as all this on-roof solar comes together and all of these dispatchable resources, whether it's a refrigerator or heat pump hot water heater or whatever else, other electrical appliances, we're going to come together in a way that makes our grid more dynamic and resilient, but then also is able to pay you and give you the honor your value to grid resilience in a way that's going to make the economics look better. I think you pair that with vehicle to building charging potential, and electrification, again, isn't just an okay trade-off, but is actually going to drastically improve our quality of lives across income levels and housing types.
Awesome. All right, last question for the both of you. Are there any myths around electrification that you want to dispel? We've talked about quite a few of them here, but just wondering, you know, through your conversations, these maybe misconceptions or beliefs about electrification that you want to take a moment to disprove. Chris, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting one that I think a lot of folks, like the grid is a really complicated machine, right? The most complicated machine that humanity has ever created. And it's not always clear like how electricity gets generated and put on it. But I think there's a common misconception that like there's some static value, we'll call it 10 units of electricity. And if we go all electric, we'll need 11 units. And like, that's just like, how do we possibly have the electricity? And it's not quite how it works, right? Like we're actively procuring and building and adding generation sources all the time. And so my common myth is that we do have enough electricity and we'll continue to have enough electricity for our electric buildings. Of course, there's complications and the story is always more complicated than that. But generally speaking, we're pretty good to go.
Okay, Alelia, anything from you?
Yeah, I think that was a really important one, Chris. I think the only one that I would add on is that natural gas isn't without its own resilience challenges. People seem to forget that natural gas is a combustible fuel and that in an earthquake, those pipes are in the ground and we are very seismically active in our area. And so that there's actually a significant resilience challenge with the natural gas infrastructure, including what happened in Porter Ranch, which basically poisoned an entire community. So I think that that's the piece that people are forgetting, right? Is that, yeah, sure, we have PSPS events, but just as often we have natural gas leaks, which accounts for, a tremendous amount of methane injection into the atmosphere. So that's the one that I would add on to everything else we've talked about.
Yeah, that's really important. I appreciate that. We did get one question in the comment box, and Chris wondering if you can share why SLO chose a reach code versus the health and safety approach. And maybe from both of you, like what would you recommend for a city that's just starting down the electrification path?
Yeah, so we chose the reach code approach because at the time, remember this was early 2019, and we were among the first sort of batch of cities thinking about this. It was the most tested approach. There had been a decade of reach. I don't know how long. Many other reach codes have been passed before, and this is just a slightly different flavor of that. But then as we saw how other cities were using their legitimate expressions of their constitutional powers, it just became clear that there is a more elegant way to achieve our policy objectives. And so we still move forward with the approach we had because that was the best we had at the time, and have since done some learning and sensing to figure out there's a better way to achieve that.
I think the only thing the advice I would give to other cities, it really depends on political will, right? Because it takes a certain amount of political will to do a long-standing ordinance and a muni code change. But if your council's supportive, 100% is the simplest way to go, and requires the least ongoing maintenance. But if you have less of that political will or commitment to it, then the reach code allows some off ramps, if you will.
And I might just suggest too, as far as what the appropriate policy is for your city is obviously not my business, but just to share that there's a wide network of practitioners that have built up a lot of expertise in this space over the last half decade, and are, we're all available to collaborate and to share information and resources. So if you're a staff member on this call and this is a new conversation for you, please reach out to us, and we'd be happy to point you in the right direction for resources.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And it's been great to connect with the Regional Energy Network, 3CREN, and many other non-governmental organizations that are also really interested in this space and have provided their time, expertise in supporting this effort, whether it's webinars and trainings or other things like that. So grateful for all the work that everybody's put into this space. Well, that's it for today, folks. Chris, Alelia, so grateful for your time, your energy, and all of your work in this space. It's been so nice to hear from your perspective and learn from your experience a little bit. And I will make this available on YouTube, hopefully as a resource to share with other municipalities, contractors, architects, or others that are interested in this space. So I do want to make sure that this is a resource that lives beyond this moment. So again, thank you so much for your time, and for everyone that attended today. Appreciate your interest in this matter. Keep asking those hard questions, keep being inquisitive and exploring what electrification might mean in your life. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. Be well.